welcome to Werner Economics. I just wanted to make you aware of a recent report I wrote on Substack, rwerner.substack.com, which, as a German citizen and European, is on a topic that I have been quite concerned about. It's actually in many ways just hard to believe what really is happening in Europe. First, one has to be aware in the post-war era, this construct that was created from what were democratic countries. They essentially got together and created an undemocratic structure, which doesn't really seem to make sense. And of course, as I wrote in an earlier Substack with a lot of details on the deep state, this was a deep state operation. I mean, the documents have been declassified. It's a matter of public record that it was the CIA that created what we now have as the European Union, and they did this on purpose, and that explains this puzzle. How could democratic countries create an undemocratic structure? Well, it wasn't about democracy, far from it. It was a control structure. It was always about control. The CIA had been jealous of the Soviet Union, and it modeled this literally on the Soviet Union. Do you know that the Soviet Union argued officially in its propaganda that, well, this is a democracy. Why? Well, we have a parliament. Look, there's parliamentarians. There's all of them, hundreds, and they get salaries and they're talking and deciding. Well, we all know, and there's no dispute about that, that was a rubber stamp parliament in the Soviet Union. Now, technically, how do we know that it was absolutely no democracy and it was not a proper parliament? We know this because that Soviet parliament had no power to come up with new laws. The real legislative power is to draft, propose, present, table, and then decide new laws. That is called lawmaking. Well, they come up with this clever structure in the Soviet Union where you have basically this front, this Potemkin village, this show theater of a parliament, but the parliamentarians had absolutely no power to actually propose any laws. Why? Where did the laws come from? Well, they came from another institution, namely the so-called Politburo of the Central Party of the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, USSR. So that was the real power center. And that group of people was not democratically elected, of course, and that's how it worked. Well, guess what? That's how the EU has been structured. The so-called European Parliament and these European parliamentarians, I mean, they're getting showered with money. Their monthly salaries is just unbelievable, huge amounts, mostly tax-free with all sorts of other perks and benefits. This is just to pay them off to keep quiet and not tell the European public, by the way, we're just clowns because we have no power. They literally have no power to propose any laws in the European Parliament. All the laws come from the Politburo, which is what? The unelected European Commission with its commissars, clearly modeled on the Soviet Union. That's the system. Now, the top commissar has come out with a statement last month, and that is very, very concerning. Ursula von der Leyen announced new plans, the Rearm Europe plan of massive, unprecedented armament expenditures, public expenditures that are going to be implemented on the EU level, but also on the national level. And they're talking 800 billion euros, which is a lot of money. And as part of this plan, she also announced that, well, to fund this, we have various schemes, and I detail them in my Substack report, rwerner.substack.com, look it up. But she also says things like, well, for this, we want to mobilize the unused savings of the Europeans. Wow. And she refers to the trillions in savings, mostly bank deposits that people have. And in some countries, it's true that, for example, Germany, Austria, the people generally are very risk averse. And so they've chosen voluntarily, freely, while there has been a free economy to that extent, they've chosen to hold a lot of their savings in liquid assets, in bank deposits. In Germany, it's quite a high ratio. They're not really so keen on stocks. And of course, one reason is that, when you are below average in terms of income and wealth, you just don't have enough leeway to risk your savings, and the stock market clearly is risky. There's no doubt about that. And so then it's all about wealth preservation. And of course, with small amounts, you don't get the good advice, but do follow my channel and my Substack. And so they've chosen, they want the safety of bank deposits. And if you keep your money in several banks, maximum 100,000 euros each, it's covered, it's guaranteed. And, there's also technically no reason why the central bank should not step in, fulfill its function as lender of last resort, and ensure that those savers will always have their purchasing power in a liquid form. If you have a central bank that is actually willing to do this, and so far in the past, the Bundesbank, the German central bank, clearly was, and there's never been a crisis, a major crisis or banking crisis under its watch. But the ECB is a different story. You mustn't forget that the ECB already, and I warned about this in my book Princes of the Yen, already 2003, that the ECB is likely to create bank credit-driven asset bubbles, followed by banking crises, recessions, and large-scale unemployment, which they did in two phases. Phase one was this asset bubble from 2004 to 2009 in the periphery, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, and Greece. And then they switched to phase two, which was from 2009 property bubble, just like in the other countries, but now in Germany and Central Europe, massive property bubble that peaked only in 2022. And that is still collapsing. The German economy is already significantly in recession. It's going to be looks like the third year of contraction. Look up my Substack on Germany, on the German economy. And the shocking thing is the banking system is now also essentially that's been the goal of this ECB policy, and they've been aiming at killing the hundreds of German small local banks that have resulted in a strong Mittelstand, small and medium-sized firm sector, hidden champions, being market leaders in their market niche in the world. And then there's the local banks behind that that back that up. But that's been the target, and the ECB wants to kill all those small banks. And of course, banking crisis in Germany is therefore really what it desires. Sadly, we have to come to the conclusion that
drinking warm water before bed dropped me from 247 to 196 while I slept. Apparently thousands of people are already doing this, and I can't believe that I didn't know about this sooner. And now that I've tried it and experienced a true body transformation for myself, I've had so many people ask me how I did it. After decades of struggle, wishing I could have the body of my 20s back, I finally found something that works and works fast. If you're tired,
central banks sometimes have these aims, as I've shown in my work again and again. Bank of Japan, Bank of Thailand, creating the Thai crisis and the Asian crisis, and of course the ECB. I warned in Princes of the Yen that it's not a continuation of the Bundesbank, it's the revival of the Reichsbank. The Reichsbank was the central bank that created first asset inflation in the 1870s, and then deflation in the 1880s. And then it served its role in the First World War to ensure a strong war economy. But as soon as the war had ended, it was under foreign control. Germany was largely foreign occupied. And of course, the first thing they do is make sure they control the monetary system. When US troops moved into Iraq, they first went to the central bank and they got the gold. Libya, they got the massive amounts of gold. The people's gold was looted. And likewise, Germany, after the First World War, the central bank was under foreign control, and then created this hyperinflation, and then policies were taken to create essentially economic conditions that brought Hitler into power. That was also the Reichsbank. So really the worst central bank in history, if you want. I mean, you list that up. And sadly, I predicted the ECB is going to be a continuation of that Reichsbank. And it is actually, if you read it, Princes of the Yen, quantumpublishers.com, you will find the reasons why that was a sound argument. Of course, it's panned out from its policies. We can see that now. So that's the sort of background we're facing, where we have a European Commission, which is a dictatorship run essentially by the deep state CIA and fulfilling its own goals. And that's really where the battleground still is, because while Trump has been fighting the deep state and has been partly successful in the US, that's not yet true in Europe. And so that's really the ground where the CIA and the deep state continue to fight on, using essentially all the European countries where the CIA has a lot of power and control. In Germany, very much due to the occupation powers that and NATO powers that the US still enjoys. And the Trump administration needs to be aware of that and actually stop the deep state and its activities in Europe. That's badly overdue. So, but while that's going on, so they're pushing now for this rearmament program, and the German government, that is still in coalition discussions, but has already declared that they want to do that as well. And very concerningly, they want to fund this by mobilizing people's savings. And that is definitely cause for much concern, especially because that is a consistent policy. We've seen other European leaders referring to that, and they talk about the Savings and Investment Union, which is full of contradictions, doesn't make sense, but one way or another is going to increase further central control over financial markets and people's savings. And then we have the German coalition government, and their statement has recently come out, the agreement. And also the figure who wants to be chancellor in Germany, essentially prime minister in Germany, Friedrich Merz, he has said already months earlier the same thing as Ursula von der Leyen, that really he thinks the massive German savings, the bank deposits, should be mobilized and used. Of course, that shows the complete lack of understanding. I mean, the bank deposits were created by banks when they created credit, and that created those deposits, and they show the money that is not in circulation, because the other side of the bank balance sheet, when these deposits were created, was doing what they would call mobilize purchasing power by creating credit, money creation. So it's a complete misunderstanding, but if they now want to somehow get to people's savings, then that doesn't leave many very positive and attractive options from the viewpoint of ordinary people. So we have to be very concerned. In my Substack on this, at rwerner.substack.com, I do list essentially a spectrum of things they could do, and sadly we are sort of towards the end of the spectrum where it gets more and more centralized and essentially forced measures by the government to take control over our savings. Now, in this coalition treaty, they give us a glimpse of some of the measures they might adopt. But also the Bank for International Settlements, based in Switzerland, had provided some ideas. And the BIS has already, a couple of years ago, stated that they want a digital asset register, which was immediately picked up by the EU. So they're already working on that. So everyone's assets in the EU are in the process of being put on some digital register. And then in the coalition government treaty, we are being told that actually they are going to go through people's assets and check assets. And what they're going to do is, and this is absolutely shocking, this is a sort of measure that you would do in a totalitarian communist regime, but not a free market democracy. You would not do this. Namely, they're switching the burden of proof. If you own something, you now have to prove, they say they're going to ask for this in the coalition treaty, you will have to prove how you got those assets. Now that's completely unfair, and probably, for the younger generation, it's not a problem. Recently come to wealth, it will be well documented. But it's well known that particularly the biggest bulk of savers are the elderly in Germany. They've accumulated, of course, huge savings, and they're the ones that love bank deposits. And often it is literally just being very frugal and not spending, and over years and decades, just saving every little bit and saving and saving. Now, they're going to be required to come up with the receipts. How did you get this money? Of 40, 50 years ago? This often will not be possible at all. And if you can't prove it, the money's gone. This is what they're saying, because there will be the presumption of wrongdoing. And of course, reversing this causation and essentially assuming people are criminals is absolutely outrageous, and is what a totalitarian regime does. We should definitely oppose any such measures, but these are being discussed by governments, and it's quite clear that together with the digital asset register, ultimately what von der Leyen and the EU leadership is thinking of, and there's many intermediary steps as I outline in the Substack report, but ultimately the key trump card, they believe, is to introduce the central bank digital currency, because then together with the forced digital system of assets and transactions digitally, of course, then they have complete control. And then it'll be just a matter of introducing the right decrees to give them the right to help us allocate our money for better purposes, such as funding a bloody war against Russia, or other such measures as they decide. And citizens will have less and less recourse, which is not surprising, because the EU, under this commission and in this structure, is an undemocratic, essentially dictatorial regime. So have a look at the Substack, and let's stay alert. And also let's oppose the introduction of central bank digital currencies and digital ID, which is really the initial stage they need to introduce this digital prison. Let's not allow this to happen in Europe. And with this, I'm going to say goodbye. God bless, and I hope to see you soon.